Credo che possiamo iniziare. Nonostante il tema del giorno, iniziamo in un perfetto orario quasi. E vorrei spendere due parole. Ovviamente siamo tutti qua per ascoltare Eric. I apologize for not speaking in English, but you have translation and everything. But vorrei semplicemente spendere due parole, 5-10 minuti, per introdurre Eric Maskin e introdurre il tema della discussione di oggi. Visto che siamo di fronte a un pubblico generale, può darsi che qualcuno non conosca Eric Maskin. Non perderei tempo a spiegare chi è se fossi davanti a un pubblico di economisti. Eric è naturalmente il vincitore del premio, uno dei vincitori del premio Nobel dell'economia del 2007, ma credo che sia veramente una di quelle persone che onorano il premio Nobel anziché essere onorati dal premio Nobel. Ha una serie di contributi in vari campi della teoria economica che sono stati estremamente originali ed estremamente fecondi nell'originare programmi di ricerca. Il più famoso, almeno per me, visto che è il filone che io ho seguito più strettamente, è quello della teoria del disegno dei meccanismi, ossia l'idea che se si vogliono ottenere determinati risultati dalla politica, nell'economia, nelle aziende, in qualunque organizzazione sociale, occorre pensare bene a come disegnare gli incentivi che vengono dati agli attori che partecipano a queste organizzazioni, dato che la situazione normale è che chi partecipa a queste organizzazioni, noi come consumatori, noi come lavoratori, noi come elettori, abbiamo informazioni che il regolatore non ha, che il capo dell'azienda non ha, che il Parlamento non ha, e pertanto riveleremo queste informazioni e agiremo come si desidera che agiamo soltanto se vengono forniti gli incentivi adeguati a che questo avvenga. Ora, questo può sembrare un tema, questo del disegno degli incentivi, può sembrare un tema abbastanza distinto e differente da quello di cui andremo a parlare oggi, che invece è un tema squisitamente di teoria delle decisioni, ma dirò un paio di parole in chiusura di questo mio intervento per spiegare perché in realtà non è esattamente così. Eric anche ha contribuito in tutta una serie di altri temi di teoria economica, teoria delle aste, che in parte è un'applicazione della teoria del disegno dei meccanismi, la teoria dei giochi ripetuti, e non mi dilungherò qui anche perché diventerebbe troppo lungo, e anche contributi su teoria delle decisioni e in questo caso la teoria del cosiddetto hyperbolic discounting, del procrastinare. Ora, questa questione della procrastinazione, come siamo abituati a chiamarla, è una questione che può sembrare di poco conto o insomma, un elementare fallimento della volontà, che basta che ci mettiamo con un po' più di forza e ce la facciamo ed evitiamo. Ma in realtà è un fenomeno abbastanza, prima di tutto è un fenomeno abbastanza diffuso, e secondo è un fenomeno che ha implicazioni a livello aggregato estremamente importanti. Ci sono due principali questioni che possono essere influenzate da un atteggiamento cosiddetto di procrastinazione. Il primo è il fallimento di completare piani di risparmio che siano sufficienti a garantire una ricchezza abbastanza elevata quando si smette di lavorare. L'atto del risparmio è un atto che, come tutti gli altri, è soggetto a procrastinazione. Qui l'idea è che esiste sempre un dilemma, un trade-off tra la gratificazione istantanea che possiamo ottenere spendendo immediatamente i soldi, comprandoci l'ultimo gadget che vediamo nel negozio e cose del genere, e invece l'atto, chiamiamolo così, virtuoso, anche se in realtà qua la questione non è di virtù, di resistere all'impulso immediato del consumo per mettere da parte i soldi per il futuro o comunque costruire la ricchezza per il futuro. In questo senso quello che procrastiniamo è l'inizio di un piano decente di risparmio, mettiamola così, e evitiamo di farlo per ottenere la gratificazione istantanea del consumo. Un'altra area molto importante in cui il comportamento procrastinante può essere un problema è quello della costruzione di capitale umano. Quando, se qua ci sono degli studenti, alzi la mano chi non ha mai pensato, beh insomma la prossima ora mi rilasso un po', guardo un film e poi inizio a studiare. E dopo un'ora, beh insomma sì, però posso sempre iniziare tra mezz'ora che tanto non cambia niente, alla fine studierò comunque 3 ore, eccetera. E si arriva alla fine della giornata senza aver combinato nulla. Lo stesso fenomeno, vi dico, se qua ci sono degli studenti di università, vi dico che purtroppo il fenomeno va avanti tutta la vita. Anche se diventerete docenti penserete sempre, beh adesso mi metto lì e scrivo l'introduzione, ma però posso anche farlo tra mezz'ora, non c'è problema. Ho appena finito di scrivere queste note da cui ovviamente ora, questi sono aneddoti che possono essere divertenti. La verità è che un comportamento del genere, quando viene adottato a livello di massa, a livello aggregato, può avere effetti macroeconomici abbastanza devastanti, sia in termini di incapacità poi nel futuro di avere abbastanza ricchezza per mantenere il proprio livello di consumo, sia in termini di eccessivo ritardo nell'ingresso del mercato del lavoro. Avevo promesso all'inizio che avrei cercato di fare un collegamento. Allora, il perché facciamo tutto questo, il perché esiste questa tendenza al procrastinare, questo lo spiegherà Eric durante il suo intervento. Avevo promesso all'inizio che avrei cercato di spiegare perché questo c'entra col disegno dei meccanismi, visto che tutto c'entra col disegno dei meccanismi, ed è arrivato il momento di farlo. Di fronte a questo tipo di problemi, di fronte a questo tipo di comportamenti, è come se giocassimo una partita tra noi stessi e noi stessi nel futuro. È come se avessimo di fronte differenti materializzazioni del sé e fossimo incapaci di costringere il nostro sé attuale a comportarsi come il nostro sé futuro vorrebbe o viceversa. Che cosa bisogna fare in questi casi? Beh, quello che bisogna fare è cercare di costruire meccanismi che ci costringono a fare quello che vogliamo. Trovare dei modi, sviluppare istituzioni economiche che possono indurre comportamenti virtuosi in un qualche senso, nel senso che vorremmo se non fossimo così portati a procrastinare. Faccio un paio di esempi che possono essere interessanti anche per Eric, perché riguardano istituzioni economiche che sono abbastanza peculiari all'Italia. Come voi tutti sapete, in Italia il salario annuale viene normalmente pagato su 13 mensilità, non su 12. Molto strano, perché? Perché la 13ª mensilità è quella che riceviamo poco prima di Natale. L'idea è quella, che io ho sempre trovato questa istituzione francamente ripugnante, perché l'idea che mi si dovesse ritardare il pagamento del mio salario annuale, di fatto una media di 6 mesi, perché questo è quello che succede, mi sembrava un esproprio. Tutte le volte che ho parlato con chiunque non fosse un economista teorico in particolare, mi sono sentito dare del matto, in particolare dai miei genitori, che sono anche abituati. Il consenso verso questo tipo particolare di istituzione sembra essere estremamente vasto. Nessuno questiona, non ho visto proteste sindacali, non ho visto proposte di cambiamento, non ho visto nessun movimento che, non dico abbia con forza contestato, ma semplicemente alzato la questione, che magari questa 13ª che riceviamo poco prima di Natale potremmo riceverla prima e staremmo meglio. Questo è uno dei meccanismi in cui, in questo caso mediante la contrattazione collettiva, è uno dei meccanismi in cui evitiamo i problemi che la procrastinazione può indurre. Lì l'idea è molto semplice, tutti vorremmo, tranne pochi matti come al solito, avere i soldi per fare regali a Natale, abbiamo paura se veniamo lasciati a noi stessi di spendere i soldi prima di Natale pensando sì vabbè ma aspetterò il mese prossimo, inizierò a mettere da parte i soldi per Natale, e quindi si chiede sostanzialmente che qualcun altro lo faccia per noi. Nella sua presentazione Eric fa lo stesso esempio, e trovo molto interessante per gli Stati Uniti, però in un contesto istituzionale diverso, dove i Christmas account vengono scelti volontariamente dalle persone. In questo caso quello che abbiamo è una scelta che viene fatta mediante contrattazione collettiva o addirittura mediante legge. Spero di avervi interessato al tema, spero di avervi spiegato perché questo è un problema serio di cui preoccuparsi, non soltanto un qualche fallimento della volontà su cui possiamo sorvolare, e direi che a questo punto posso dare la parola a Eric.
Thank you very much, Sandro, for that lovely and very thoughtful introduction. And thank you very much for coming this afternoon. I must say it's an enormous pleasure to be here in Trento for this economics festival. First of all, it's just an astoundingly beautiful place. Look at this hall. It's a pleasure just to sit and look at the ceiling, look at the walls, but then you go outside and you see the mountains, you see the buildings of Trento. What a lovely setting for any kind of event. But on top of that, we have an economics festival here, which for an economist like me, is a real treat. I mean, imagine a whole town being turned over to economics. Not something that happens every day, but perhaps should happen more often. And I'm glad that Trento is setting such a good example. I hope you will forgive me for speaking in English this afternoon, but my Italian is very far from being up to this task. The topic, as Sandro already explained, is procrastination. And so let me begin with an example that refers to the United States in particular, but which I think we are all familiar with in one way or another. So imagine that it's the month of February, and we know that in April, we have a painful task facing us, and we have two options. We can either do it by April 1st, in which case it's going to take 5 hours, or we can wait all the way to April 15th, in which case it's going to take even longer. It's going to take 8 hours. And the reason for picking April 15th is because in the United States, that is the deadline, that is the last day for submitting your tax return to the government. Unfortunately, most people, and I'm not an exception here, wait till April 15th, even though it's more painful if you wait till April 15th. And let me explain how it happens that we end up waiting till April 15th. If we were deciding in February when to do it, of course we would say April 1st, because then it's only 5 hours. We get it over in less time. But as April 1st gets closer and closer, we make excuses for ourselves. We think, well, maybe it's not so bad putting it off a few days, and then we put it off a few more days, and finally April 15th comes along, and we can't put it off any longer. We've been procrastinating, and now the deadline is reached. Now, the way that an economist would explain this or describe it is to say that when we're thinking about future pain, the pain that we have to experience when we're doing our tax return, as we get closer and closer to the deadline, we discount future pain less and less. We discount it more and more so that we are apt to do it now with smaller and smaller likelihood. We are more apt to procrastinate because we are putting less and less weight on the future pain. So put it slightly differently, the more heavily we discount future pain, the more likely we are to postpone that pain. Let me give you another example, and Sandro also touched on this in his introduction. It's the idea of saving money for Christmas. In the United States, in England, and a number of other countries, people have developed this very peculiar device for saving money. Lots of people, at the beginning of the year, think that they are going to, this year, finally, save an adequate amount of money for Christmas, but later they discover that their intentions are not carried through. There are other nice opportunities that come up. Perhaps they'll spend the Christmas money on their summer vacation. Perhaps they'll spend it on children's clothes when the children go back to school. When Christmas comes along, they don't have enough money for Christmas. And the way to explain this is that as the year progresses, they are discounting the future, in this case, Christmas, more and more. They are neglecting the future more and more. They are becoming more and more impatient. They are putting more and more weight on consumption now rather than later. The future is being discounted. Now, of course, after this happens a few times, people recognize that this is human nature and that they're probably going to do it again next year. So the way the problem has been solved in the US is by the creation of what is called a Christmas account. In a Christmas account, every month, money is automatically deducted from your salary and goes into the bank. You are paid no interest at all, so it doesn't sound like a very good deal. And furthermore, you are not allowed to take your money out until a few weeks from Christmas. So it sounds like something that no one would want to do. Nevertheless, it's been extremely popular. And the reason why it's popular is that it basically forces you, it commits you to do some long-term planning, to have enough money for Christmas. So in both the tax example and the Christmas example, the idea is that as time goes along, the future is being discounted, reduced in importance more and more. That's, economists call that hyperbolic discounting. This leads to problems unless you take corrective action, such as creating Christmas accounts. Now, perhaps tax deadlines and Christmas spending are not problems of the first magnitude, so you might ask, well, why are economists interested in this phenomenon? And Sandro explained that the reason why this procrastination is so important is that it interferes with something which is important to every economy, which is saving and long-term planning. For example, we all know that we should be saving for our retirement or for our children, but lots of people, probably far too many people, don't actually save adequately for these purposes. What they say to themselves is, well, I've still got time, I'll do it later. I won't do it now. This ends up having disastrous consequences. Now, one way that this problem has been partially solved on a social level is through forced savings programs such as Social Security and pension plans. Under Social Security and pension plans, again, the money is taken out of your salary automatically. You don't get to choose that, and is put in some kind of retirement account or pension plan, or goes to the government and goes into a Social Security account. Now, these plans are often justified by all sorts of reasons, but in fact, the main justification is human nature. The main justification is that on our own, we are just not going to do this adequately for ourselves. So we voluntarily submit to having other people force us to do it. If we did not procrastinate, we would not need Social Security. We would not need pension plans. We could make all of the decisions on our own as private individuals. Now, one point that is interesting is that we are not the only species that procrastinates. I've been talking about human nature, but in fact, it's not just human nature. Other creatures do this too. And in fact, there have been some interesting experiments with birds, with pigeons and starlings, which demonstrate that they procrastinate. And let me explain how we know this. The way that the typical experiment works is that a bird will be offered a choice between either a reward in the relatively far future. For a bird, 30 minutes is pretty long. A reward 30 minutes from now, and let's say that it's a big reward, of 10 seeds, or it could have a smaller reward, 3 seeds, but it only has to wait 10 minutes. Now, the way that the bird makes the choice is that there are 2 keys on a keyboard, and the bird can peck either of the keys with its beak, and that makes the choice. Now, of course, birds have to be trained a little bit to learn how to do this, but they learn how after a few hours training. Now, here's what happens. Many birds initially go for the big reward, the reward that they have to wait for 30 minutes, the 10 seeds. But after some time has elapsed, they switch to the earlier option. So after, say, 8 minutes has gone by, the birds become very impatient. They know that if they peck the 3-seed key, they will only have to wait for 2 more minutes. So they switch from being patient to being impatient. And this is a very consistent finding. In fact, there's an interesting twist to this experiment. Sometimes in the experiment, there is a third key that is introduced, and all that this third key does is to make one of the other keys non-functional. The third key makes the early option key, the 3-seed key, not work anymore. And what we see is that many birds that in the early experiment switch from the late to early option, the 10-seed to the 3-seed option, eventually start pecking this key. And what they're doing, in effect, is committing themselves not to switch. They see from their past experience that they've switched. They don't like the fact that they've switched. They don't like the fact that they've become more impatient. And so they commit themselves not to switch. It's the same thing as committing yourself to save for Christmas. So here is the deep question. Why do we do this? Why do birds do it? Why do we do it? There must be some reason. Because after all, our actions, the actions of birds, are governed by urges, instincts, inclinations, and these urges and instincts and inclinations must come from someplace. They're not completely arbitrary. There must be a reason for them. The reason I would like to suggest today is that these behaviors are genetic. That is, they are shaped by the forces of evolution. Now, this is a little bit controversial because, of course, in the case of our species, we are able to calculate. We don't act entirely on the basis of instincts. And furthermore, we can learn from experience in a deeper way than birds can. We can be brought up by our parents, for example, to learn to not procrastinate, or at least our parents could try to teach us not to procrastinate. That's why I find that the bird evidence is especially interesting, because in the case of birds, we know that their behavior is much more genetically driven than in our case. And in our case, it's more complicated. So if birds do this, then, and we understand, we come to understand why they do it, that probably will tell us something about why we do it too. And what I'm going to do is to suggest that, in fact, there is a simple evolutionary story, a simple genetic story, which explains the bird behavior, why the bird has this urge to become more and more impatient and switch from the big option, which it has to wait longer for, to the early option. And the explanation is that this behavior actually has survival value. It helps an animal, a bird or a human, survive longer or with higher probability than would otherwise be the case. So I'm going to get to that in a minute. First, let me deal with a simpler question, which is, why do we discount the future at all? That is, we can get rewards now, we can get rewards later. Why is it virtually a universal tendency to put less weight on the future, to discount the future more? It turns out that there are two answers to this question, two related answers. The first is that, in general, the future is uncertain. And there's a phrase in English that gets at this principle. It goes, a bird in the hand is worth two in the bush. The idea being that if you have a choice, if a bird has a choice between one seed now and two seeds after 5 minutes, it might very well go for the one seed now, because if it waited the 5 minutes for the two seeds, perhaps they won't be there anymore, or perhaps just one seed will be left, or perhaps the bird won't be there after 5 minutes. So there's because of this uncertainty, if given a choice between now and later, you will choose now. But there's another reason for choosing now, and that is that there is a cost to waiting. If you wait, you use up energy. So there's a physiological cost. Just waiting for the bigger reward involves burning up calories. And so we have to take that into account, and that's another reason for going for earlier rather than later options. Also, there's an economic reason. There's an economic cost involved in waiting, which is that if you're waiting for something, you are typically passing up other opportunities. You have to take those other opportunities into account, and that's another reason for acting sooner rather than later. So I've explained why there's discounting, but I haven't yet explained why, as time goes on, we discount more and more, which is the key idea behind procrastination or hyperbolic discounting. And the explanation for this also has to do with uncertainty. And the idea is that a bird, for example, faces uncertainty not just about whether the reward will be there in the future, but also when the reward will be there in the future. I've talked about 10 minutes versus 30 minutes, but typically the decisions that a bird makes are not so definite. That is, it's not 10 minutes versus 30 minutes. There's uncertainty about the exact time that a reward will be realized. And let me give you an example. Imagine that you're a blackbird and you're waiting for the fruit on a raspberry bush to ripen. There's no point in eating the fruit now before it's ripe, because you won't get very many calories. You want to wait until the the fruit is ripe, but you don't know when the fruit will be ripe. You're pretty sure the raspberries will be ripe by tomorrow morning, but there's some chance that they will be ripe earlier, or there's some chance that they'll be ripe later. You don't know. And that's the key idea. So that means that you have to form some kind of average. You have to calculate the average time that it will take for the raspberries to ripen. You have to calculate the average return, the average payoff that you will get from some kind of decision. So, what do I mean by average? If you're facing a prospect where there's a 20% chance that you will get 5, and a 30% chance that you will get 10, and a 50% chance that you will lose 6, well then the average value is 20% times 5 plus 30% times 10 plus 50% times minus 6. So the average value, the expected value of this prospect is 1. It all averages out to 1. So if you chose this prospect over and over again, on average, each time it would make you richer by $1 or €1. And so prospects with higher expected values are better than prospects with lower expected values, with lower average values. So let's look at this from the bird's point of view. Imagine that there are two prospects. One is a raspberry bush, and another is a blackberry bush, but there's a waiting cost. The bird has to use up 1 calorie for every hour that it waits. Now, the raspberry bush gives the bird fewer calories. Raspberries are not quite as nutritious, as full of calories as blackberries. You get, say, 4 calories if you eat raspberries. And let's suppose that the bird must wait for up to 2 hours for the raspberries to ripen. The other alternative is the blackberry bush. Blackberries give the bird more calories, say 5.2 calories, but the bird has to wait up until 4 hours for the blackberries to ripen. For each hour that goes by, let's suppose that there is a 20% chance that the berries will ripen in that hour. So this is a very important ingredient to the story. With raspberries, the bird has to wait up till 2 hours, with blackberries up to 4 hours, but there is some chance that the berries will ripen earlier. The time of ripening is uncertain. So that means that from raspberries, the expected payoff when we do the calculation, including the uncertainty about when the ripening will occur, the expected net calories that the bird will get is 2.2. The expected net calories that the bird will get from the blackberries is 2.4, which is bigger. So that means that the bird should initially choose blackberries. However, let's imagine that an hour has gone by and the berries haven't ripened. Now the bird can redo the calculation. Of course, the bird is not really doing this calculation, but its instincts are urging it to act as though it's doing the calculation. And now the average net calories from raspberries are 3 calories. The average net calories from blackberries are 2.8. So by after this hour, the raspberries are now more attractive than the blackberries. So the bird will switch from blackberries to raspberries after an hour. This is exactly the behavior that we see in the laboratory. This is exactly the sort of behavior that we do ourselves. We become more impatient. We switch from the higher paying option to the lower paying option. And the idea, as far as raspberries and blackberries, is that the bird originally chose blackberries because they have more calories, and also because there's some chance that the blackberries will be ripe early. But after an hour has gone by, the chance that the blackberries will be ripe early is lower. Of course, the chance that the raspberries will be ripe early is also lower, but it doesn't matter so much with the raspberries because they're expected to ripen sooner anyway. They're expected to ripen within 2 hours anyway. And so that is the implicit reasoning behind why the bird should switch from blackberries to raspberries. And I've illustrated this by this raspberry-blackberry example, but actually the logic is very general, and it applies to many, many situations, that it is a good idea for getting more calories or a higher payoff to become more impatient. However, this depends critically on uncertainty about when the payoffs will occur. This reasoning all depended on the uncertainty about when the berries would ripen. And since the switching helps the bird get more calories, we should expect that a bird who has the urge to switch would be favored by natural selection, and that's why I argue that this is a genetic explanation for this behavior. But I'm not quite done, because although I've explained why birds become more impatient, why there's a genetic reason for birds becoming more impatient, I still haven't explained these Christmas accounts, and I haven't explained why birds peck this third key. Why does that happen? The reason why that happens seems strange, because if switching from blackberries to raspberries is such a good idea, if becoming more impatient is such a good idea, why do we have to commit ourselves not to do it? And here's the answer. The answer is that the urge to switch from blackberries to raspberries works very well for the typical choices that the bird faced, or the typical choices that we faced thousands and thousands of years ago, when we were living in a very uncertain world, when there was a lot of uncertainty about when payoffs would be realized, when payoffs would occur. But in the modern world, in the case where we're saving for Christmas, there's no uncertainty about when the payoffs will occur. We know when Christmas is going to occur. It's not going to suddenly happen earlier this year. And therefore, it doesn't make sense in the case of Christmas for us to switch. Similarly, for the pigeon, in these experiments with seeds, there's no uncertainty about when the pigeon gets the seeds. It's either at 10 minutes if it pecks that key, or at 2 minutes if it pecks the other key. So in the experiments that the pigeon faces, or in the modern world that we live in, the rationale for switching, for becoming more impatient, is lost. Nevertheless, we are stuck with our instincts. We can't suddenly get rid of human nature, and the pigeon can't suddenly get rid of pigeon nature. So all we can do is to try to trick ourselves. We can't stop the instincts, but after learning from experience, we can try to take steps which stop us from switching. So that's where the Christmas accounts come in. That's why we commit ourselves to save for Christmas, and that's why pigeons commit themselves not to switch in the seed experiments. And the key to this is that both we and pigeons are able to learn from our past bad experiences. We learn from past years that we're not very good at saving for Christmas on our own, so we put our money into the Christmas accounts. Pigeons learn that they're not very good at waiting for the 10 seeds, so they disable the ability to switch to the 2-seed key. And that suggests that when talking about evolution, we have to be careful about which scenarios, which problems we face are normal or were normal over the thousands and thousands of years that our instincts evolved, and which fall outside of normal evolutionary experience. It also suggests that if the theory that I'm suggesting is right, we can test it by introducing uncertainty in these pigeon experiments about when the seeds are being realized. And I'm happy to say that these experiments are now being done. It will be very interesting to see the results. Because once we put uncertainty about when the pigeons actually get the seeds back into the problem, then switching becomes reasonable again, and we should stop seeing the pigeons pecking the 3rd key. Well, I have talked about pigeons, I've talked about humans. I hope I've persuaded you that procrastination is a problem we should take seriously, and I hope that I persuaded you that the psychological or evolutionary story behind procrastination makes sense, and I hope you will agree that all this discussion is not entirely for the birds. Thank you very much.
Quindi grazie a Eric Maskin per la sua presentazione. Credo che abbiamo un po' di tempo per domande dal pubblico, nel caso ce ne siano. O tutti sono convinti della spiegazione evolutiva? Ciao.
It's a pleasure to make your question, to ask you something. A friend of mine, he lives in Texas, and when he visited me here in Italy, he was really surprised when me and all my Italian friends, we always got money from our parents and we always paid like the coffee, a beer with cash. Because he told me that in the US, he always paid with credit cards. And then I thought that when we buy something, we compare the happiness we get when we satisfy our desire. We compare it with the pain we receive when we pay something. In the US, right now, there is a huge private debt due to these credit cards. And it's a really perfect mechanism to increase the consumes. Has it something to do with your theory? Thank you.
Thank you very much for that question. Actually, you've raised an excellent issue, and credit cards and credit card debts are a perfect illustration of the problem of procrastination. If you pay for something with a credit card, you are postponing the pain that you will feel when you actually have to give up your money. You hold on to your money until the bill comes in. And I should first say that credit cards have, to some extent, destroyed Christmas accounts. It used to be that Christmas accounts were very, very popular in the US. They're still used, but they're not as popular as they used to be, and that's because credit cards have enabled people to avoid the commitment device of the Christmas account. It's true you have less money because the money is being taken out of your salary automatically and is being put into the account. But if you've got a credit card, you can spend anyway, and that's what people do. If people are too impatient, if they procrastinate too much, which is what I have been suggesting and which all the experiments suggest, that tells us that with credit cards, where it's very easy to postpone payments, we will have a tendency to accumulate debts which are too big. That's what's happened in the United States, and that's why we see that people who get into credit card trouble sometimes deliberately cancel their accounts because they know very well that if they don't give up their credit cards, they're going to use them. And if they use them, their debt is going to get even higher. So canceling credit cards on your own is a commitment device for avoiding unmanageable debts. Unfortunately, in the United States, not enough people have used that device.
Buonasera. Lei ha parlato di previdenza pubblica come un esempio efficace di procrastinare, un esempio virtuoso. La mia domanda è relativa in particolare alla situazione italiana, dove l'incertezza domina e non è affatto detto che la nostra previdenza possa reggere, data la crisi demografica, per cui abbiamo sempre meno giovani che versano contributi e in prospettiva sempre più anziani che devono percepirli o andranno a percepirli. Allora, dato che il sistema potrebbe implodere a breve o in futuro, quali sono le alternative a una previdenza pubblica che potrebbe rivelarsi inefficace o disastrosa? Grazie.
Yes, as you suggested, the term social security may be a little bit misleading. Maybe social security is not so secure, after all. But as to what the alternatives might be, well, the ideal would be for us as individuals to save ourselves when we are young, rather than relying just on the system to do it for us. Because, as you say, perhaps the system will fall apart, and perhaps there won't be as large a nest egg for us when we retire as we were counting on. So the best thing for a young person to do, if he or she can, is to save on their own, to put at least some money away, so that even if the public system turns out not to be so secure, they will have something.
Just a small question, and I apologize for being unsavvy in economics. I'm not into economics at all. But I was wondering if, let's say, the relief that you feel from a task done might be, in a way, might be beneficial to economics. And if economics explore this relief, and like as if it was beneficial in a way to it. So the relief kind of from you perceive from something you do and is done. Is it explored by economics, and in which way? So, thank you.
You raise an interesting psychological point. And in fact, there are two forces which push us in opposite directions when it comes to accomplishing difficult tasks. One is the force that I emphasized in the lecture, which is the urge to postpone because it's painful. But the other, which you're referring to, is the satisfaction that we get when we've managed to put something painful in the past. There's an English expression for that too. I said that to explain discounting, we can use the term "a bird in the hand is worth two in the bush." To explain the phenomenon you're referring to, we can use the expression "business before pleasure." You get the business out of the way first, so you can enjoy what comes after it more. The unfortunate fact is that the first force, the urge to procrastinate, is typically stronger. It's true that there's something which partially counteracts it, but in fact, procrastination is such a strong urge that for most people, most of the time, it wins.
You describe examples in which the ordering over future actions or outcomes changes if I consider them today or later on. And that is a powerful impact in our explanation of positive behavior. Not that clear what are the normative implications, that is, what is the point of view I should take knowing that the preference and evaluations changes according to the time when I take a decision?
That's a very good and sophisticated question, and not one that I touched on in the lecture. So the question that's being asked is, if you're a blackbird and you're considering switching from blackberries to raspberries, do we look at this at the beginning of the problem, before any time has elapsed at all, or do we look at it after an hour when the calculation has changed? And in general, the answer to that is not so clear. So the normative question in general is quite complicated. However, in the examples I've been talking about, it's clear that that the proper vantage point is looking at it at the beginning. And the reason why that's the right time to look at it is because in the case of Christmas accounts and in the case of the pigeon experiments, the urges to switch are misguided. They are being applied to a different problem. They're not being applied to the problem at hand. And therefore, it's not valid to look at it after some time has gone by, because our instinctual calculations are not well geared to the problem that the bird or that we are actually facing. So for the case of saving for your retirement, saving for Christmas, for choosing between 10 seeds and 2 seeds, it's the initial calculation which is the correct one. The later one is being distorted by evolutionary urges which are not appropriate.
You have explained the theory of procrastination as applied to individuals, animals, birds, or humans. Do you think this theory could be also applied to complex organizations like corporations, government, nations? And does the current crisis tell us something in this perspective?
Well, I was debating whether or not to bring that up, but since you've asked this question, let me say it. The answer is yes, and what we've seen in Europe, I think, is all too clear a case of procrastination. The leaders of Europe have been putting off a definitive resolution of the series of debt crises which they've been facing now for several years. And I think the reason for this procrastination is pretty clear. They're hoping that it will go away by itself, just as when we put off doing a painful task, we hope that somehow someone else is going to do it for us, and by putting it off, we won't have to do it ourselves. Unfortunately, in the case of Europe, no one is going to do it for Europe. Europe is going to have to do it for itself, but there is a very strong psychological reason why the leaders of Europe postpone nevertheless.
Just a comment on this concept. I would say that this situation can be when individuals have a particular behavior, when they are in a strategic game, like institutions, like for instance a monetary institution against government, they strategically interact. So maybe it's a problem of credibility in this case. I mean that government are intended to postpone, and the problem is that the design of threat in this case was mistaken.
Yes, well, I think there's a serious argument that, for example, the European Monetary Union was misdesigned. It was misdesigned in the sense that it centralized monetary policy in the hands of the European Central Bank, and it did not, at the same time, centralize fiscal authority, that is, the ability to tax and spend. And as a result, European decisions about taxing and spending and debt have all had to be negotiated among the leaders on, whenever they arise, and there's a strong rationale for those decisions to be postponed, as you were suggesting. So it's a design flaw. Sandro said that procrastination can be thought, and dealing with procrastination can be thought of as a mechanism design problem. There was a design problem in the formation, in the initial formation of Europe. By the way, it's not too late to correct it. It could still, there are steps that still could be taken to put Europe back on the right track, but it's much more difficult to do now than it would have been 10 years ago.
You said that in institutional life, when the possibility of the possibility of the cost to pay is fixed, the probability don't change. It's not rational to use the procrastination like for taxes. But what in the social events, like we borrow some money to a person, then we don't then we procrastinate giving it back, and then we both forget about this borrowing. So the procrastination in this case is as an effect, and maybe is it possible that these cases have a big reward on our instinct of procrastination?
Yes, you're right that although I was talking specifically about cases where procrastination is not an optimal response to the problems we face, there are cases where it is quite a rational thing to do. So for as you say, if you've borrowed money from someone, you may delay paying it back because there's some chance he may forget that he's lent you the money, in which case you won't have to pay it back. The problem is that although there are such cases, in the modern world, they are much fewer than was the case thousands and hundreds of thousands of years ago when we were evolving. So yes, there are cases where procrastination makes sense, but most of the time, unfortunately, it does not. It works against us, and it certainly works against governments. So I think we have to do a better job of designing our way around this, this instinct to procrastinate.
First of all, I would like to thank you for this large amount of information on this topic. I would like to go out a bit from the economic part and start a little society problem. This edition of festival is speaking about generations. So my grandmother and my grandfather told me that there are some phrases like, why you can do something tomorrow when you can do it now. So now we procrastinate. How could you think that in the future our child and our grandchild can do? They can return to the top as our grandfather, or is worse, every time worse and worse and worse till the end?
I think history shows that these things work in cycles, that we're not doomed to procrastinate more and more, that we can learn in a cultural sense from past experience. And let me give you an example about why I have at least some optimism that matters will improve. In the 1930s, there was a devastating depression, which affected Europe, affected the United States. It was actually much worse than the current situation, and that was, of course, extremely unfortunate. But it did have a good side, and the good side was that people learned from the experience of losing all of their money, of losing their job, that it was important to save. And the succeeding decades, the 40s, the 50s, and the 60s, were periods where savings rates were much higher than they had been, say, in the 20s. For that matter, we also learned from the 30s that financial regulation was important, because the depression of the 1930s was, like the most recent recession, a consequence of a financial meltdown. And for a number of decades, there was quite good financial regulation. Banks were regulated, and there were essentially no financial crises for a number of decades, even though there was pretty good growth. So we can learn from bad experiences, and we can improve our behavior after bad experiences. The problem is that we don't learn these lessons forever. There will probably come a time, maybe 50 years from now, 60 years from now, when the lessons that we have learned in the past 5 years will have been forgotten again, and we'll have to relearn them. That's why I say social movement tends to be cyclical rather than all straight up or straight down.
Hello. Thank you very much for your presentation. It was very much interesting. I have just a small question. I was thinking about how do I behave when I make choices or when I make or make not decisions. And I was thinking not just about the fact of procrastinating, studying, or something small, but as well my behavior when I am a consumer. For example, I do know that it's bad for environment, and therefore, and indirectly for myself in future, that I consume meat. But I keep on eating meat, and at the same time, I know that there are some products that are more ecologically sustainable. But at the same time, even if I had money, I would keep on choosing maybe the cheaper option. So what I was thinking was, if and once it is confirmed what you have explained about our sort of natural drive towards this tendency of procrastination, do you think that, for example, it would be good that policymakers decide, for example, to establish that each person has to meet this amount of meat or has to consume this certain product, or that the flip side would be definitely as well some paternalistic behavior from policymakers. So what do you think about this? Thank you.
Economists tend to be a little bit skeptical about paternalistic behavior because they're not so sure that the paternalists, the ones doing the making the decisions, are that much better at making decisions than individuals. However, your question points to an important role for public policy, and that is when individual behavior creates an externality, has an effect on other people, which the individual doesn't take into account. So, for example, if I drive my car, I've got my car runs on petrol, on gasoline. If I drive my car, one of the side effects of doing that is that I'm burning the gasoline, and carbon dioxide is being emitted into the atmosphere. That affects not just me, it ultimately affects everybody through climate change, through global warming. In fact, it affects not just current generations, but it has the potential for affecting future generations as well. But I don't take that into account. I don't have an incentive to take that into account, even if I'm very environmentally aware. I don't have the incentive to fully take that into account when I drive my car. So, what is the way to deal with global warming? Well, one way is for government to introduce a higher tax on gasoline. That is not paternalistic, and I still have the option of buying the gasoline if I want to, but it is appropriate that I should pay more for it because of this externality, because of the damage that is being done to generations of people in the future. So correcting externalities is a proper and important role for government policy, and even strongly anti-paternalist economists would agree with that.
I'd like to ask you if you ever think about how can you use your theory for borrowing and investment mechanism. I mean, imagine the procedure of a bank which borrow money and lend it to firms. Of course, a firm will tend to procrastinate the payback of the loan if it can, or to roll over debt. At the same time, the household hyperbolically discount the future, so they withdraw money, or there is the risk that they withdraw their money. And in the same way, when a firm issues some bonds and make an investment decision, there is there is the risk of a mismatch in borrowing and lending decision, and it can affect the long-term investment in a sense. So how can your theory be applied to financial crisis, broadly speaking, or to cover this mismatch also in a sense in a balance sheet approach? Thanks.
Well, you're absolutely right that the tendency to postpone repayment is a problem in many kinds of lending arrangements, but there are various mechanisms that can be used to counteract that effect. And one important mechanism is collateral. So if you're a bank and you've lent me money so that I can buy a house, one way of ensuring that you're going to be able to get me to repay is by using that very house as collateral. If I don't repay, you can take over the house. And we see the same kinds of collateralized debts in business loans as well. So collateral is an important tool for overcoming the incentive not to repay or not to repay on time.
Good afternoon. I was wondering when you were talking about the fact that if you don't do one thing now, you don't even know when you may do this in the future. But, and this is good for individuals and for birds as well. But don't you think there's also a thought, and this is for individuals, I guess, only, that if you don't buy something now, for example, you might disappoint someone, or not just, for example, a parent that doesn't buy something to its child. So if I don't do that, I might disappoint my child, so I tend to buy it now. But also in a negative way, so if I don't buy this, I may ruin my image, let's say. Don't you think there's also this that doesn't work for birds? Thanks.
Sure, you're absolutely right. There can be other reasons, or there can be other considerations than just discounting, which affect the decision of whether to buy now or buy later. But it's interesting that you should use the example of buying something for your child now, because otherwise the child will be disappointed. because, in fact, something that parents often try to do, not necessarily completely successfully, is to deliberately not buy something now in the effort to try to teach the child patience. One thing that does not come naturally to children, as I'm sure the parents in the audience know, is waiting. Nevertheless, in the modern world, where so much investment is long-term, education, for example, is a long-term investment, your success depends on your ability to wait. And there's some very interesting experiments that have been done with young children. There was an experiment done in which a child was told that she could either have one piece of candy now, or if she waited for the experimenter, the experimenter then left the room. She was told if she waited until the experimenter came back into the room, she would get 2 pieces of candy. These experiments were done many years ago, and children were followed in later life as they grew up. And it turns out that the children who waited for the 2 candies had significantly more success in their career, which all goes to show that first, patience is a virtue that we already knew. But that patience is something which is learned very early in one's life, and so it really makes sense for children, for parents to instill that in their children. Whether or not they can do it successfully is another matter, but it's understandable that at least they should try.
Thank you very much to Eric again. Siete liberi di andare, vi possiamo